Okay, thanks everyone for coming out this afternoon. We have Paul Knight, which was retired from the meteorology department and a former state climatologist. So of course we had warm weather this week, but things will be changing a bit for the weekend, and I know you'll have a winter outlook as well. So take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I appreciate the turnout. It's nice to see your faces here today, and some of my colleagues who have stepped out of the regular routine and are into their own routines in retirement. I guess you'll be able, oh, there it is. Okay, I wasn't sure which way to look. I won't follow this exact order. Actually, I'm going to swap things around a little bit, but I will begin by presenting an award, of course, from my Center for Responsible and Accurate Predictions, and then we'll actually get into the short-range forecast challenges before we look at the setup for the seasonal outlook and then the specifics of the seasonal outlook. Fred was kind enough to remind me, actually to alert me, that NOAA issued their seasonal outlook today, this morning. So lo and behold, I was able, with his guidance, to be able to grab it and take a look at what they're saying too. So here's this is going to be impossible to read, so I'll have to interpret it for you. But this is the New York Times newspaper. This is the banner. This is the top from the late edition for Sunday. So this is the one that came out, the latest edition that was available for Sunday, September 4th this year. You say, well, who really cares? Well, the forecast was for today, it said rain, high 75. Tonight, windy with rain from Tropical Storm Hermine, low 65. Winds and heavy rain on Monday, which is Labor Day. And so this was the forecast that was published from the New York Times. You know, several million people are reading this. I happen to be in Southeast New York helping my brother move that weekend. So I was there Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And I saw this paper early Sunday, and I was really quite taken aback and quite embarrassed, as a matter of fact, to be in my profession, because while this is what the satellite imagery looked like, the New York is in that, at the end of this little red arrow here. So there was a cirrus shield. But if we actually look at the obs from Central Park, here are the obs starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, going until 6 o'clock at night. And yeah, I know they can't see, you know, clouds above 12,000 feet or something like that, but it was clear. And I was north of the city. I was in White Plains area, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. And the temperature got to about 75 or 80 degrees, and it was really quite pleasant. So this is deserving an honorable mention as far as a true crap forecast, because it was awful. I mean, there's you know several million people reading the paper that was published just the evening before. Not that we've ever had anything to do with the New York Times, but fortunately we don't anymore. But that was a forecast that really didn't turn out very well at all. So kudos to those who happened to make that forecast, because it really stuck up the joint. Now here's a crap forecast that's on deck. I didn't have time to actually verify it because I was trying to get more of the other stuff in the substantive stuff. But this was the Farmers Almanac forecast for the summer of 2016, and you can see that here actually was forecast to be cool and wet, which enough said. Okay. So if I come back at some future date, we'll actually review this one. This is the actual temperatures. The whole country was very warm. Of course, here was very, very warm. And here's the precipitation. It was wet through the Mississippi Valley and lower and upper Midwest. But of course, here it was very dry. New England was exceptionally dry, where it was supposed to be hot and wet. So this one we'll have to wait for another time to look at. Now, speaking about dryness, how real is the drought? And I decided to use my own backyard as a gauge of this, because I do take observations daily for CoCoRaHS, and this is my precipitation starting April 15th and then going to October 15th. The reason I picked April 15th is that's the day I put out my evapotranspiration gauge, so I could get some sense of how much evaporation we had. And my total precipitation through the 15th, which was of course a few days ago, I've had maybe 1,800 since then, was 15.15 inches. So I had a little over 15 inches. But my evaporation was 23.65. So if you look at it that way, from a net loss of about 8.5 inches. Now this is an evaporation gauge that is supposed to mimic evaporation over alfalfa, which of course is a pretty resilient crop. But the idea is that as it hasn't been dry, yeah, actually in the mean we're about almost 2.5 months below normal in terms of precipitation during the growing season, which is, of course, in some places ended last week with the frost. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that is about the time when our deficit reaches between 7 and 8 inches here, at least in State College, which of course happened here on the 10th of August, we get one of these spikes of rainfall. We had another one here where we're getting close to about 6 inches. We had another inch of rain. And now we're once again approaching, 7.5 inches below the annual mean. And so are we due for another soaker is probably the good question, and the answer is yes, but whether it's going to be right here at the rain gauge on the roof or out in front of the building, I don't know. We'll actually look at the weather in a minute, but to at least speculate on the rainfall, these two charts, this is the SREF forecast, actually, pardon me, this is not the SREF, this is the NAM forecast for precipitation from 6Z Thursday through 18Z tomorrow. Now, I know it'll still be raining at 18Z, but it gives you a very good sense of the contrast. And this is Center County right in here, where northwestern Center County is forecast to have between 3 and 4 inches of rain. And meanwhile, in northern parts of Huntington County, it's supposed to be less than 1/2 inch of rain. So this is going to be a challenging precipitation total forecast. The plumes, and this is the SREF plumes from 3Z. I couldn't get the 9Z for whatever reason, it wasn't in yet. Shows quite a spread, with the maximum being somewhere of order of 3 and 3.12 inches of rain, which would match pretty close to what we had on August 10th. That massive thunderstorm complex moved through here. And the minimum is somewhere in the order of about 1/2 inch. So the mean from this is of order of 1 1/4 inches of rain, which seems like not a bad way to plot down, because that seems like a reasonable amount of rain. So there's going to be a challenge here in the forecast with regard to the amount of precipitation that'll be falling. Here's the surface map from noontime, and it's pretty evident that there's a boundary just stretching into northwestern Pennsylvania. The wind has shifted over to the northeast in Erie, although the temperature is not that cool because the lake temperature is still pretty warm in the high 50s, I suspect. Probably so, because I see it's 61 with the northeast wind in Cleveland. But here's the boundary. If anything, as is typically the case with these anabatic fronts, they tend to go slower than the guidance predicts, and they just get hung up by terrain too. So it seems to be having a difficult time getting into the Appalachians, and that is likely going to be the issue when it comes to the forecast here too. If you look at the visible satellite, because there's been some beautiful cloud formations today, some nice wave clouds this morning, but those have burned off, and here we are, still having some lingering stratus, but for the most part, the real boundary is way far to the west, and oddly enough, there may even be some convection starting to pop up in this very warm air mass that's between here and the boundary in eastern Ohio. So strangely enough, we may be in, typically the thunderstorm season ends here around the equinox, which of course was in September. So we're a good month past that, but it's not that you can't have a thunderstorm, it's just less likely, statistically speaking. So there's the challenge. I guess I didn't actually specifically look at the guidance yet because it was just coming in, but this is the SREF plume from 3Z, which I showed you before for State College. But if you pick someplace a little bit west of here, say for example in Du Bois, to get some sense, it actually looks fairly similar. Its mean is 177 rather than 124, I think it was here, and 3.3 is the max. So we can see that there's definitely a gradient, and the min there is a bit higher, almost 0.8 inch, which is a pretty high minimum. Maybe northwestern Pennsylvania, Erie might be, or Bradford could be a fun one to take a look too. Yeah, Bradford's max is 4, their mean is 2.32, and the min is an inch. Now, of course, this is just, you know, dependent upon the convective parameterization schemes that are used by the different members of the SREF. But inevitably, you know, there's going to be a fair bit of rain in western and northern Pennsylvania during the next couple of days. And of course, tomorrow will be a drastically different day from today, because as we look at the regional analysis in northwestern Ohio and southeastern Michigan, these are the conditions much more like what we'll be experiencing tomorrow, which would be mid-50s with a wind out of the north, northwest, northeast, I should say, and steady rain, which most residents of this area are not expecting, or they might be expecting if they're listening, but most folks aren't listening. So more than likely there'll be some folks caught by surprise tomorrow. Fortunately, I guess the schools, at least the state college area schools, are on break, or at least they're having the parent-teacher meetings and in service. So folks are not going to be, kids won't be outside freezing to death at the bus stop tomorrow morning, unless their parents put them out anyway, just to say, yeah, go out and wait there. But most parents don't do that, I understand. And if they do, you know, the authorities will check into it. Here's the NAM, and from the 12Z run, and I don't know because I have zoomed in. Let me zoom out a little bit. And the outlook is for I think one of the bigger challenges in this is, when is the rain going to start here? Yeah, I was concerned yesterday when I was coming in early this morning to be with Kyle's class, is that I would have to have my rain gear. And then I looked this morning, and, you know, all the showers are going well west in the Allegheny Plateau. And I thought, well, maybe it'll come in this afternoon. But it sure looks like if we don't get some convection, which I assume is what some of this stuff is growing up by 3Z over the Laurel Highlands, this stuff here, if that doesn't filter into here, it's probably going to take until the boundary gets here, which is going to be a while. That may not be till sometime tomorrow. Here we are, 12Z, and we're still not in the boundary. 15Z, so it looks like sometime between 12 and 15Z tomorrow is when this surface front will move through. But of course, when it does this and the low ends up going to our west and north, we end up being on the traditionally drier side of the lift, and therefore the heavier rain ends up being in the northwestern counties and not here. So this is, let's go back, 27, 30. Yeah, I see the good rain moves to the north, and there's actually a fool's clearing before we get probably some sprinkles and showers. But the big thing is that the temperature will drop rather drastically. Another very mild night likely coming up tonight here, with temperatures ahead of the front, with the south flow staying in the 60s or high 50s at least, probably even warmer than it was last night, and then dropping rather dramatically once the front goes through, with 10 degrees. As far as for the game, Saturday looks just like a unpleasant late October day, with temperatures struggling to get much out of the 40s. Add to that a wind blowing somewhere between 10 and 20 miles per hour, and a fair bit of cloud cover with the winds passing across the Great Lakes. It's just not going to feel very nice. And then for the game, which is what starting at 0Z, or is it 7 or 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock. Yeah. So 0Z, it'll probably be in the low 40s and maybe drop into the high 30s for our overtime win against Ohio State. So we'll see how it goes with this as far as weather. But it does not look like a particularly pleasant evening to be out. And whether there's any flakes seems unlikely. With this sort of pattern, the temperature tends to be fairly run in a fairly narrow range. So once it gets into the mid 40s, it's probably not going to go very far from that, because there's wind and clouds, and that will not get the temperature drop. So I don't see any new freezes occurring in this. I guess there's a possibility that the high ground of northwestern Pennsylvania, above 1,500 feet, could have their first flakes. I doubt it'll win the contest in the snowboard contest. So, so that's kind of the story. We'll do a summary of that in just a little bit. Back to the seasonal outlook, and see where we're at with this. Okay. Oh, I mentioned to Kyle's class that this is kind of a classic adiabatic front. I guess a type 1 of Maddox, of with the echoes like this one over here, the last one, showing the echoes training along the path of the boundary. So this is where there's going to be, rather than just a spike of rain, there's a large area that will get a fair bit of rain for a while. Now, whether that includes here, I somewhat doubt it. I think since we're in a drought, we're going to stay probably droughty too. So the winter pattern is, last year I had the dancing gorillas. This year it's a zoo. And if you so choose, you could listen to Simon and Garfunkel's at the zoo, which is an amusing song. That's what the link is down there, but we're not going to do that. I enjoyed it. Here are some of the things that we want to consider. I think it's always good to see where we've been, so we know what differences are going to happen. The top here indicates the departure from normal temperatures so far this month, and that precipitation percent of normal. And then this is for the past 60 days. I didn't get 90, but this is the past 90 days for precipitation. So for temperature, of course, we meaning here Pennsylvania, but points just to the west, Ohio Valley, and even into the Tennessee Valley, have been very much the center of warmth. And to some degree, the dryness has been blotchy in the southeast, although the Drought Mitigation Center expects that the drought in the Tennessee Valley is going to grow as the winter progresses, and also quite dry in New England, although they may get at least some respite here. So that's where we're starting from. The zoo players in this winter outlook, I think, are the following. We really kind of have the neutral zone in the tropical Pacific. We're pretty, I mean, it's somewhat weak La Nina-ish, but you look at the dynamic and the statistical guidance, and they're all keeping it, within half a degree Celsius of zero, plus or minus, and it looks like it'll be pretty much near neutral. However, once again, it won't be quite the gorilla because it's not quite the same amplitude as last year, but we still have the monkey here in the North Pacific, which is this warm pool representing a positive PDO and what should have been a long-term negative PDO. So this is, although it is not quite classic, because we should have a rim of cool water around there, and also a knot of cold water there, but that's a monkey to look at. We still have this goat here in the North Atlantic, which is this persistent cool pool that remains there and has been there for about 2.5 or 3 years. Now it's upstream of us, or downstream, I should say, so I don't think it's had very much effect. We have the polar bear, which is, of course, the snow cover, the Judah Cohen's research looking at the advance of snow cover in Eurasia. And I'm going to introduce a new one, which is a mongoose in the Indian Ocean. So this is the sea surface temperature anomalies in the early part of April across the world, but specifically point your attention to the Indian Ocean. And you'll see that virtually the entire Indian Ocean was warmer than normal. In fact, some places were extremely warm, especially south of the equator in the southeastern part of the Indian Ocean. This is the Indian Ocean temperatures as of the early part, or the latter part of September, early October, and it has cooled off dramatically. And there's a dipole. There's also an oscillation that occurs in the Indian Ocean. Most of the time we don't pay attention to it because it has no effect, but this is about as dramatic of a reversal as you'll see, going from warm to cool, which brings up and this, by the way, is the mongoose, in case you're wondering what is he doing with this stuff. That's the mongoose. We're going into a negative phase of the IOD, the Indian Ocean Dipole, which is a sloshing of the thermocline in the Indian Ocean. Indeed, this would be cool waters amassing in the northwestern part of the Indian Ocean and warm waters in the boiler box area north of Australia, just to see that really is happening. Yeah, see, here's the warm waters in Indonesia and northwest Australia, and here's the cool waters up in the Arabian Sea. So this is definitely a negative phase of the IOD. So what does that mean? Well, that's one factor. We'll look at that in terms of the analog forecast. Also, this is the Snow Advance Index, which I think Judah presented when he was here, I don't know, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And this is the snow cover as of yesterday across the northern hemisphere. And you'll see that virtually all of Siberia, all of Asia and Russia is now snow covered, even parts of Mongolia. Not gotten very much into Kazakhstan yet. So earlier in the month, when I had this plotted, we were running on the higher side, but I looked at the numbers this morning, and we're at, I think, 7.3 million square miles of snow cover in Eurasia, which puts us way up here. So this is quite an advance in the snow cover. And of course, Cohen's work makes the point that the speed at which it advances is related to the likelihood of a negative phase of the Arctic Oscillation in the upcoming winter. The negative phase of the Arctic Oscillation, depending upon where it sets up, of course, could mean much colder than normal conditions in the middle latitudes of both North America and Europe. Thanks to Fred. Here's the NOAA outlook for the winter, just coming out late this morning, and it shows temperature upper left, precip lower right, and this indicates what is a fairly typical La Nina event. La Nina has warm in the south, cool in the north, unlike El Nino, which last year should have been cool in the south, warm in the north. We'll see it was not that way either. But this would be a rather typical La Nina, and even the precipitation would follow that because it tends to be relatively dry, with the Gulf closed for business for most of the winter, and the northwestern U.S. and the northern Rockies having an additional or an extra amount of snow. And even the Great Lakes, because this cool pool will make occasional injections across the Great Lakes, which, of course, with such a warm summer, are running well above normal in terms of their temperature. The dynamic models, I'm going to break it down to 3 months, so we'll kind of go flying through these, but I'm going to show you the dynamic and also some of the analog models for December, January, and February, and then we'll summarize it, and we'll see if there's any questions. This is persistent. So if we knew nothing else, and hopefully we do know more than that, we would go with persistence. This is what last December was like, in case you forgot. It was balmy. The NMME, which is the multi-model ensemble, North American multi-model ensemble, which uses 7 or 8 different models. It uses GFDL's models, the Canadian model, NCAR's community climate model. And this is the forecast of the temperatures, 2-meter temperatures for December. So it's just stuck in the warm mode. For the upper left, this is the CFS V2 forecast. This is the actual anomalies being predicted for December. This is the European Center forecast for December. So out of all of this, only the European shows some cool up in the upper Great Lakes and parts of Western New England. Now the analog forecast, the upper left analog is looking at what is it like when the IOD is so strongly negative in October, and what does the December that follows look like? And this is the temperature pattern as expected. This is the probability, I should say. So the blues would indicate a reduced probability of being above normal temperature, which means more likely to be cool. But you see, it's still kind of a piecemeal pattern. I looked at an analog for the exceptional warmth and dryness that the northeastern quarter of the country had during the months of August and September. It was really quite extraordinary. It was in the top 5. And I looked at all the top 20, and this is the typical December that follows. So it actually has some cold in New England. This is now looking at a broader view, neutral ENSO and a positive PDO, which again has a message of somewhat cool, but this is farther west in the Mississippi Valley, extending into the deep south. So not at all like a typical La Nina. This is January. In case you forgot what last January was like, it was warm in the northeast. It was actually relatively chilly because there were some snowstorms that moved through the mid-Atlantic area. But it was warm in the north, cool in the south, a little bit of an El Nino texture to it. NMME, which is at least being explored as being the way we should be going in our seasonal forecast, doesn't show very much signal, except that it cools off in Western Canada. CFS, cool in Canada, warm in the US. The European forecast indicates warm in Canada, cool, at least a cool patch in the US. By the way, some of this is, these are relative to the 2001 to 2010 climatology. So if we were to look at a longer climatology, we'd probably get a slightly different signal. But for the past 10 years, it takes into account some of the optical climate normal values. The analogs, the IOD negative, not much of a message of anything cool in the south, piecemeal mild in parts of the east. This is the hot, dry northeast. It turns cold in January. And this is the neutral ENSO positive PDO. Therein is when the forcing or the blocking occurs, typically in Western Canada, that allows cold air to be discharged into the lower 48 states with a positive PDO. That warm pool tends to force a ridge into Alaska. Finally, February. This is what last February was like. It was, again, quite mild in many places. This is the NMME, which shows finally cooling off in parts of northwestern North America, but staying warm in the lower 48. The CFS finally cools it off across Canada over a wide region, whereas the ECMWF actually just has pieces of warmth. If anything, it gets warm in Canada during that forecast. The analog for February, IOD shows not very much warmth with the hot, dry northeast analog for August, September. And here's the neutral ENSO and positive PDO. This goes in line with Fred's long shot. Was it from last week, I guess, Fred? 2 weeks ago. That had a cool signal in Pennsylvania, and actually, for that matter, parts of the east, with a positive PDO in February, at least persisting in February. This, by the way, this is the crap on deck. There's another one. This is the Farmer's Almanac forecast, which has mild and dry virtually everywhere. Right, so mild. It's mild and snowy here. Cold and wet in New England. That'd be a nice change for them if that really would be the case. But it just has a bit of cool near the border, including in the Pacific Northwest. Otherwise, what looks like a very strong La Nina signal, which would be dry and mild over a good chunk of the southern 2/3 of the U.S. To summarize, we have the slow-moving front will bring a period of heavy rain as the temperatures drop, and there's a flooding risk in at least the northwestern quarter of Pennsylvania, if not third. Those strong winds, unfortunately, are going to shake some of that beautiful fall foliage and let them clog up some of the drains. And with the heavy rain, there'll probably be if it does get here, there'll be some flooding in the streets. But once the temperatures drop into the 40s and stay there through Saturday, maybe it'll be even, it'll certainly feel a lot less than the 40s at the game with the wind blowing, but maybe it gets to 38 or 39 for the game. But the temperatures should recover next week. We didn't look very much next week, but that's been the message. But not to well above seasonal levels, at least back to near or slightly above seasonal levels. Well, did you look at the most recent ECMWF? Actually has the southeast ridge verging again late next week, so who knows? Seasonal outlook is compared to last year. This is a no-brainer. It'll be cooler this December. I mean, it has to be because it was just so warm. Actually, I remember grilling on Christmas Eve because it was near 70 degrees. If there's a cold month, I think it's going to be January. I think the odds favor between the analog and the dynamic models that January may be the cold month this time around. Whether it's actually much below seasonal levels. By the way, I think my caveat on the December is that even though it's going to be much cooler, I still think it may end up averaging above the 30-year normal. Just that we're so used to it being warm that if we get back to seasonal levels or even slightly above seasonal levels, it'll feel quite chilly, especially in December. But I think January is the month that has the potential to average below the long-term mean. And it's a toss-up for February. I lean toward Fred's long shot, which is toward cold, but I think that there's enough of a mixed message here that if the blocking sets up in a way that is not favorable toward the eastern U.S., it could end up being relatively mild too. I have no idea with precipitation. I we really have not demonstrated very much skill in precipitation, and that's why I didn't include it at all. And that's pretty much it. Are there any questions? Yeah, Dave.
I was outside earlier, it was a lot of stable cloud cover now with maybe with meetings. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens. I'm working the evening shifts next week. If it gets really warm and humid, there's a few middle of just a lot of stable cloud cover.
Yeah, well, of course, it cleared for a time last night, and the temperature dropped into the low to mid 50s, in at least the valleys in this area. So, of course, we had to, and then the clouds were in this morning, so we're only dealing with 10 hours and 50 minutes of daylight, so there's only so much heating we can get, insulation to warm the ground. Yeah, it's a tough, I think that the NAM's indication that there could be convection over the Laurel Highlands, because there'll be some extra convergence focused over there with the northwesterly winds coming to western Pennsylvania and the southeasterly winds here. Maybe it'll convect there, but whether it survives into this part of the state, I think, remains to be seen. But you'll have a challenge with your CWA going all the way into western Pennsylvania, whether or not you're going to be putting out any flood watches or warnings.
Yeah, we go all the way to warm.
Okay.
The other thing that came from Western New York, remember back to the other November, the lake's so warm and all this cold air blowing over southern Canada, that you might be more active winter.
Could be.
Maybe less active than, let's say, southeast PA.
It's got to be better than last winter when I think they had very little, if any, snow in Buffalo. It was really pitiful. Although the air mass that's coming in, I didn't look at it this morning. I did look at it yesterday. If you look at the temperatures in central Canada right now, north central Canada, it's not all that cold. It's 30s, 20s, but that's not that far. So I don't think it's this air mass that will necessarily be the initiator. It may take, another cycle.
I'm not checking, I see how warm the lakes are. I think they have warm.
Oh, I'm sure they're well above sea level, if not near record mildness, because it was warm. The center of warmth, especially the eastern winds, Huron, Erie, and Ontario have been exceptionally warm air around them. So yeah, I think you're right. And that, in fact, if you look at the Weather Service forecast for precipitation, that's the area, those three lakes and surrounding zones are where precipitation is forecast to be above normal in the DJF period. If you don't ask questions, I'll at least show you what I'm doing here. I have my own little monkeys to play with. And there are my soccer boys, Ryder, who's 5, and Andrew, who's 7, and my little sweetheart, Abigail, who will be 2 in 2 weeks. So. Other questions or comments?
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Right. Thank you.
Next week, we'll have Joe Murgo from WTAJ coming up to give our review. So, hope to see you then. Thanks.